seperti yang kami katakan tadi, pada mereka yang lebih selesa untuk menggunakan kaedah Slido, sila imbas QR code tersebut. Dan kami juga menyediakan mic kalau ada yang mahu bertanya. Cuma kami minta mungkin angkat tangan jadi kami tahu siapa, dan apabila setelah diberikan mic tu berikan nama dan mungkin dari mana, jadi kita boleh tahulah. So saya berikan semula sesi ini kepada Dr. Norshahril.
Thank you, Julina. Thank you, Mr. Zainul Abidin Rasheed, for the sharing. Indeed, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, it's beyond grandfather stories. Well, he did some aspects talk about his grandfather stories, but I think those are very important stories for us to reflect. I think there's plenty to chew from what he's just shared. But what I really admired about his sharing is that, it really started off with looking about the significance of history. I think that's one of the key takeaways I got from your sharing. I mean, we cannot survive in this world without looking at where we begin. And so history is very important. Whether it's Sanila Utama, I would argue that we should go beyond Sanila Utama, if you want to study more about the region. So please, this is self-promotion. Please come to my Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, to know more about the history of the region. And we do a lot of archaeological stuff as well. So I think that's very important. And since we're in the spirit of promoting and marketing books, the book is available outside at a discount price. Please feel free to help yourself to this edited volume that we did together. It's also part of our series to engage the young people. And we are glad that we managed to get not only Singapore Malays, young Singapore Malays, to articulate their views and vision, respective areas, but we also managed to get youth from the region as well. So I think we should continue with this dialogue.
Just to add, Dr. Yaacob also just come up with another book, right? With Dr. Nur Intan. Thank you, Dr. Yaacob.
So I think that this again emphasizes the point that, the significance of writing, and the fact that you showed books, it shows that you need to read in order to generate thinking, ideas, and writing. We should develop this culture in our community as well. And I think you have shared many aspects, your personal history, your personal journey. But I think what I like about your talk is that every single observation that you made, whether it's in Singapore, in your travels, in the Middle East, or in the US, you're always thinking back and reflecting about the community. And what is the best model? What is the best model? What can we take from this? I think that is the mark of, a thinker, to always find the best ways going forward. So I thought, the example you gave about the prayers, the Friday prayers at NASA, I think is very interesting as well. And the US society itself is very interesting about the different kinds of Muslims and different diverse ideas and so on. So I thought those are very good takeaways for us today. So so this is a session where we take questions from the audience. There's a roving mic. So I thought we have about maybe 45 minutes for questions and answers. And for those of you who are watching at home, or even those here who don't feel comfortable or speaking, please, you can use the Slido, and I will read the questions and ask Mrs. Zainul to address them. So let's take the first question, please.
Tomorrow we're starting to fast, right? Ramadan, so be kind.
Anyone? Maybe okay, Prof Farid, okay.
Assalamu alaikum. Maybe I will just make a comment, a reflection on something you had said earlier on in your talk, Mrs. Zainul. You mentioned about history of Singapore, celebration of the bicentennial, and you pointed out that we look now at Singapore history as going beyond 1819, which is of course very true. But I would suggest that there is still a very problematic way in which we look at 1819. it's still overall a very uncritical, the way it is taught in schools, in the way it appears in the textbooks, even at the university level. It's really to say the least strange and even ridiculous that a colonial founder, not only a colonial founder, but an agent of colonialism, an architect of racism in the region, a slave, well, he was involved in abolishment of slavery, but he was a drug pusher, actually. We would probably be executed if he was alive in Singapore today. Is given that level of adulation. And I'm mentioning this because the Malays above all, more than anybody else, had been critical of this, not only in academia, but also in the arts. So in that sense, and this relates to my point, that Malay heritage is not only for the Malays, but is for Singapore. So when you just take the example of Raffles, the Malays actually are the soul of Singapore. They are the ones who initiated this critique, and they continue the critique, both in academia as well as the arts. Now, the danger is whether the Malays can actually live up to that challenge of being the soul of Singapore, drawing upon the positive aspects of their tradition. Are they going to be absorbed into the mainstream in terms of this kind of mental captivity, uncritical attitude and approach towards many things, on the one hand? On the other hand, are they going to be drawn into a very exclusivist, religious way of thinking? So how do you look at the future in that sense?
Thanks, Farid. For a moment, when you started asking the question, I was wondering, was Farid Alatas or Syed Hussein Alatas? Professor Syed Hussein Almarhum was my professor too. Taught me at the Malay Studies Department in Singapore University. And a lot of his beliefs are also imbibed in the students, which he taught. The values, the service to the country and people. So we miss him. And I agree with you. I think in terms of education, a few points you raised, in terms of education, this is something which I think people have been talking about too. But in terms of delivery, in terms of how we bring about that, in terms of school curriculum, in terms of books, textbooks, is something which is still lacking. But maybe it's also because the emphasis on that kind of study is not there as much as we would like. So whereas if we see that, for example, when it comes to skills development, they're very well developed and they think of all kinds of angles. But when you talk about history, the reaction will be quite different. But if we was to talk about history in the context of what I think this whole session is all about today, the reflection, the introspection, and what it means in terms of forging that national identity or togetherness, then I think its value will be enhanced. But we also need people who can do that kind of job. And I'm not sure where our system is geared for that kind of thing, which I think we should really do something about it, look into it. In terms of the Malays themselves, how do they respond to this between those who are actually pushing for the performing arts, literature, cultural, as against, for example, the drive towards wanting to be seen as equal with the others? When it comes to the others, non-Malays particularly, this will be last on their mind in terms of wanting to show the quality, their capability. It will be measured in terms of different kind of yardsticks. even amongst the Malays. To some extent, it's gone to that way because they feel that we are lagging behind, we're trying to catch up, so we must do more than that. And in fact, not only we must do more in terms of the other areas that matters, but in fact, deliberately trying to downplay the identity part or the cultural part so that we won't be misunderstood, as though we have not changed. No? So I think this is the challenge we have to face, because I think we still need people who can actually emphasize the importance of the identity, the culture and heritage, because we don't want to be just subsumed, as you suggest, in terms of the mainstream, so-called mainstream, and we lose that identity. So, yeah, I agree with you that I think we need to look into those areas and see how best we can do it. But if I may add also, in terms of looking at Singapore, what about the regional and the international context? You know, I'm now non-resident ambassador to Kuwait, and there was a new Indonesian ambassador that has just been appointed to Kuwait. It's a lady, Ibu Lena. So when she was appointed, I'm non-resident, so she's there. So we just communicate on WhatsApp, and you know, and then she said, "Are you the former Minister of State for Foreign Affairs?" I said, "Yeah." "Oh, you have forgotten me. We met in the 70s or early 80s when I visited IAIN, Institute Agama Islam Negeri. Now they are universities. When she was a student activist there from HMI, HMI, you know, Himpunan Mahasiswa Islam. So she said, yeah, in fact, she was a guide. She brought me around Jakarta. I had forgotten that, but she's now risen to be ambassador. And there are not many lady ambassadors. And not only is she ambassador, but she's an activist. And while she was there in Kuwait, she organized a webinar to coincide with the International Women's Year on women as inspiration for development. Yeah, so that's kind of people that, because of the early activities, now even in foreign service, I found the value in that. So whether there is room for us also to be working on how we promote the identity, the culture, the heritage internationally. In fact, I must confess, if without her, I didn't even think of doing that in Kuwait. I was thinking more in terms of diplomacy, international relations, Singapore-Middle East relations, maybe at best Islam, development of Islam in Kuwait, because it's one of the modernizing players there. But in terms of Malay heritage, but she is a very active player in that. So similarly, there may be ways we can work together and project that, you know, in terms of the Malay heritage identity and what we're doing to contribute in terms of our own development, whether in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore separately, or as a group through ASEAN. And the element of harmony, the element of integration and working together is an important feature of that.
Thank you. Let's take the second question. Anyone? We haven't got any question in the slide. Oh, yes, Prof. Yaakob, please.
Yaakob, you promised not to ask. Huh?
I promise to ask you a simple question, Zainul. Thank you for the wonderful talk. I just want to take one particular point that you mentioned and you just answered to Farid. In the issue of heritage and identity, there's always this notion about, do we tap only within the small pool, or we tap into the larger pool of Nusantara? You know, this morning, if you look at the Straits Times, there was this beautiful letter, which I posted on the Facebook, of a guy saying, the causeway has really opened up. And I said, we are more connected than what you imagined to be. And that brings the second point that you raised in much of your earlier discussion about trust. If we as Singaporean Malays tap into the larger pool of Nusantara to inform our identity and our understanding of what Malay heritage is all about, do you think we're treading on something a bit more dicey in terms of how people will see us? In fact, or is it our right? Because we are part of Nusantara. Huh? Even though there'll be a new capital in Jakarta called Nusantara, we'll be part of Nusantara. So how would you tell a younger Malay that, you know, you must see yourself as part of Southeast Asia, not just part of Singapore, and that in being part of Southeast Asia, you are in no way do you sort of undermine your position as a Singaporean, basically. So in a way, tapping to that larger pool helps you to inform your identity, and in some way strengthen your identity also as a Singaporean. Your thoughts on that, please?
Thank you, Eko. I think that's a very interesting point and it's a very tricky area because it also depends on how we Malays in Singapore look at the Malays in our neighbors, Malaysian Malays, Indonesians. How do we look at them? Do we see them as a source of strength or something which we try to avoid, say, hey, better not be associated with them? Because these are real questions. Because with the kind of problems or challenges they may have individually, Malaysia as a country, Malaysia in terms of race politics, Malaysia in terms, Indonesia in its own, whether it's Jokowi or pre-Jokowi and what happens after that. And Indonesia is such a sprawling archipelago with different kind of challenges, whether the Javanese as compared to the Sumatrans and the Sulawesi. You know, at the talk I gave at the civil service group, I recall that I was given a one-to-one interview by Habibie, and he was the only non-Javanese president of Indonesia. But that also because emergency, he was a vice president, so he took over for a while. But after that, when it comes to election, will a non-Javanese ever be elected as president of Indonesia? So these are some of the things we can accuse non-Malays of being racist, but even among ourselves, between the Javanese and the Bayanese and the Malays, there are also issues. So when you look at the global picture, whether those would be the negative points that may make even our people say, hey, better not be seen as one Nusantara. But on the other hand, I feel there are a lot of strong points where, in fact, the Nusantara element can come out, and Singapore can be seen as part of that. And when we say that Singapore being part of that, how do you interpret that again? You know, the Malays or the Singaporean as a whole? Because even Singapore wants to be seen as part of the regional ASEAN, for example. There are issues sometimes when we have with individual countries, we turn to the general ASEAN cooperation to try and minimize the bilateral differences. These are real problems and real challenges. So I think you have a point there that I think is not easy, but I personally believe, in fact, there are areas we can actually work on, and we use the project that, I mean, depending again how things will develop in Malaysia, how things will develop in Indonesia particularly. In Southern Thailand is something else, Patani. Philippines, what do you call them? Mindanao. They have their own challenges, their own problems. Minorities. But if we just take the closer group of Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and perhaps Brunei, but Brunei is also unique in itself. And I don't know whether Brunei also want to be lumped together as a Nusantara. Yeah? So there are issues, there are challenges, but there are areas which we can actually tap upon, like the example I mentioned about Ambassador Lina in Kuwait. So she is active, she is aggressive, and she's using that even not only to promote the Nusantara aspect about culture, but also about the gender issues. And coming from Indonesia, talk about gender, you know, in terms of International Women's Year, I think that will help in terms of uplifting the image of they are not that backward, they are also progressive.
I think I have a related question to what the Prof said. It's more about the region. I think it's also based on your earlier point, you talk about PERMIAT and why it failed. PERMIAT and that student PERMIAT and how it failed. In fact, your generation is the most interesting generation. If I want to do a second PhD, I would have done a topic on Muslim resurgence in Singapore. Because we have Mr. Zainul here, one of the earliest graduates. We have Prof. Yaakob, J. Idris, Dr. Aisha, they're all here. They need to be interviewed. We need to document this movement and the implications. But on a related point, no PERMIAT failed because I think you alluded to it earlier that they went on different directions, right? And you mentioned Norshahril is interesting as an interesting topic that you raised in the book. But looking at the developments today, Islamization, growing piety in the region, you know, which direction do you think we should be heading to? Is it the Indonesian way, or the Malaysian way, or as you mentioned earlier, you know, we talk about the model, you know, but what are the ingredients to this model? What are your thoughts?
I think that question should be answered by the moderator, right? She's the expert. In fact, recently he commented also about this question of Nusantara. And people are saying that, in fact, Singapore Muslims don't have enough reference about the Nusantara Muslim thinking, what's happening in Indonesia, I think particularly Indonesia, less so Malaysia. But talking about Malaysia, when I went around the world to look at models of Muslim, in fact, I was driven by my wish that Malaysia would be that model. I would see Indonesia differently because Indonesia is, what, 95% Muslims? To me, that's not the measure. I want to see a real multiracial, multi-religious society, community, country that can show itself that it can be a successful government, country with the integrity, with non-corruption and all that. And in fact, I had seen Malaysia as that model. Maybe because I was influenced by Anwar, the Anwar I knew. And the conferences we attended in America, in Libya, and in the region. And I felt that Indonesia was more complicated then because it was Suharto era and the strong military power, so they would go a different way. And it's so much more complicated, much more complex as a country. I mentioned about Javanese, Balinese, and the cultural, the traditional drives and all that. But Malaysia, I thought, being multiracial, although the Muslims are in control and they are more open-minded, and they will be able to develop that model, a truly multi-religious, multiracial model of what the world needed, so that the rest of the non-Muslim world can see, in fact, Islam can work, even though you have quite a substantial Muslim and non-Muslims as a minority. But I must say that, I wonder now what is the direction Malaysia will take in terms of that. Because when Mahathir took over, Mahathir was very driven, also more socialist in orientation, but then he brought in Anwar Ibrahim to balance the two and with greater acceptance. But going forward, maybe our Datuk can answer that. But I was very hopeful. I wanted to see a model where it is really multiracial, multi-religious, but with a Muslim majority in charge, running a government successfully with all the integrity and the non-corrupt issues. I wanted to see that. In Singapore, we are a minority, too small a minority to be that kind of difference in terms of deciding what Singapore will be, but we are an important player. So, I don't know, I suppose, but we had our problems, even, in the case of Permiat, so we had to decide to disband it, and then go on our own way, looking at our own priorities, our own models, and develop our own in terms of the contextualization again.
Anyone in the audience has a question? Yes, please.
Hello, Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. My name is Nasar. I know you mentioned NASA, but my name is Nasar. I'm from 4PM. Pardon me, I'm a bit nervous talking to such esteemed panel of guests here. But probably I just want to ask from the point of view, or at least speaking from the point of view of the youth in Singapore, because I'm quite excited for today's topic, because you're talking about the future of Malay heritage. And for the youth who have not had the benefit that Cik Zainal, you were speaking about, the historical realities of World War II, the racial riots and whatnot, their views may be slightly different probably from the current mainstream narrative of what is Malay heritage. To them, probably it is, their TikTok videos or somewhat their own version of music, or something that is interest of their interest. And are we as a community now and the future are able to accept those alternative realities, those alternative what they consider as heritage in the future? Probably your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, 4PM again goes back a long way where we learn our debating skills, or rhetorical and debating skills. And I still remember Pak PM very well at Jalan Yunus. But now you have regenerated young people. In fact, you are very diplomatic, very kind when you say slightly different. In fact, it's very different. I can see it with my own children and but this is people who are close to me. But imagine with non-Malays, the young non-Malays, and the kind of life they lead. And although government has got policies about integration, like HDB, there's a limit to 30% Malays to make sure that there are enough mixing of Malays and non-Malays. But living 70% or 30%, but that does not mean they mix. They could be just smiling at the lift and that's it. But they don't actually interact. So I think there are challenges. So I think what you said, that's one of the challenges I feel that we need to really understand the young. Their mind is one thing, the method, the technology, you mentioned TikTok, but for people like us, I enjoy TikTok too, tapi to go to TikTok to reach out to you all, I don't think people like us can. But how do we do that? I think Malay Heritage Foundation, I think I must throw it back to Malay Heritage Foundation. People like Azhar and Dr. Norshahril, I think we're better understanding about how to reach out to the young. Yeah, and I think some of the programs they have, I think will encourage the young to come because they are also very engaging, very interactive. It's not just a lecture, talk down, but more sembang and discussion and interaction and welcoming different viewpoints. I think that would be good. But I think even then, they may not even say, oh, Malay Heritage Center, enough lah, But how do we reach out to them? Pak PM will have to play an important role because you have the young with you, right? So there are many ways we need to really look into how, whether it's the technology, whether it's the approach, whether it's the understanding, we need to really go all those aspects and try and reach out to them.
Still have no questions on Slido, so I'll take another question for this. Yes, Encik Rahim. But before that, I think NASA is being so humble. He's actually the new president of 4PM. He's the new president of 4PM. Yes.
No, he's taken
Many
over.
people don't know that.
Yeah. But it's after a long time, right?
Encik Rahim, please.
Yes, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Cik Zainul, apa khabar?
MashaAllah.
Yeah, you mentioned about your life story, about your education. You went to Raffles when you were young, right? So I just heard a story from my friend who has a son in Raffles. He was saying that, in Raffles there's 600 plus students, but only about 25 Malay boys are there, right? 25 Malay boys in Raffles institution. So I'm talking about the numbers, right? Number of Malay students in RI, and compared to the other races. And also from my own personal experience, my daughter just graduated from law school. Very few numbers of Malays, just like when I was in law school. The numbers don't change. So my question is about how far we have developed. When you set up, or the government set up Mendaki, and you set up certain KPIs and parameters of what you intend to achieve, do you think that you have achieved those objectives now? That was 1980-81, that's 40 years ago. So I don't know if it's a difficult question or an easy question, but hope you can comment to us about our education. I'm sure there are many happy statistics that we have, but have we reached what we set out to achieve when Mendaki was set up? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's an area again of concern to us. If I can go into the example about RI. In fact, when I was on the board of RI, Board of Governors, we were also very concerned about that. And we even introduced special bursaries or scholarships, bursaries actually, to attract more Malays. Because we found out that the numbers were falling. And so we even went down to primary 5 students, identified primary 5 students who are with potential, and we tell them we'll give you bursary so that you do your primary 5, primary 6, and they come to RI. But to our surprise, there were not many takers because they are also becoming, for 2 reasons. One, they feel that they would rather go to a neighborhood school, right? because they feel that they can excel. They become the top neighborhood school. But they go to RI, they become among the average, or even below average. The second point is that they don't want to accept bursaries because it becomes like a stigma on them. That as though they can only go to RI because somebody is giving charity to them. So we had that problem. So I think whether it's RI, whether it's the university, and what kind of causes, I think this is something, I think generally it has improved. Over the years, clearly it has improved. Numbers have improved, and the quality also is improved. Whether it's enough, that's your question, right? And whether in terms of numbers, whether in terms of interaction, whether the opportunity is provided because they are there. You may have the numbers in an RI more, but how does it bring about the kind of understanding between the Malay students and the Chinese students? Because the Malay students, that is one of the reasons why, in fact, we have a cap in terms of Malays in certain schools. Because the moment we go to 40-50% Malays in one school, they all speak Malay among themselves. So we have a cap, even that, so that we force sort of interaction and mixing around. These are some of the issues which we try to do. But physically, numbers, one thing. Interaction, making friends. You ask an average, I want to say Chinese, but maybe you should ask the Malays too. How many of their friends are of the other race? You'll be surprised to see there's very little. There are a lot of Chinese Singaporeans who don't have Malay friends, because the opportunity is not numbers are there in schools there, but they don't mix. Out of convenience, out of interest, they are quite different. So I think those are real issues. And then at the workplace is also another. And then also halal. That's why some of them complain about halalness. Before you all can sit together and eat together, no issue. You may eat your own food, but we sit together. Of course, in those days, minum sikit pun boleh lah. But now, we don't want to eat together because it's not halal. You're eating there, you have non-halal food, I would rather not. I would rather go and eat only a halal food stall. And even the opportunity of mixing and living together is also being reduced. So those are some of the issues on the practical ground. And we talk about them, but whether really something can be done is really not easy, So I think this is where Farid's earlier point, in terms of education in schools, about the history and also about what it means by our multiracial, multireligious Singapore. Is it just a show, or is it the understanding that will determine the kind of Singapore that we want as we go forward? I think that is very critical, because if we don't have that, I think like for example, in university, I deliberately didn't want to just concentrate on the Malay organizations because I want to be seen and contributing to the non-Malay areas, general areas, Singapore areas, external relations, economic society. But then the Malays say, we are already short of people. We need the Malays to concentrate on the Malay organizations. So like Chamber, I'm glad you were president of Chamber before, but what about the other national organizations? How do we get more Malays to be contribute? Will they be confident enough? Will they be accepted enough? International Chamber of Commerce or the others. So this is where the challenge for us. Yeah? And that challenge continues.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes for discussion. So just be mindful of time. We have 2 questions. Imran first. Oh, sure. We can do that. Imran and then gentleman.
Thank you, Encik Zainul. I really enjoyed your lecture. We often heard the phrase, the identity of Singaporean Malay Muslim, right? But identity is very complex. It evolves, and there's a lot of multiple aspects of the identity. So we can't speak of a single identity. But within the Malay Muslim community, there are multiple contestations over the issue of identities. You mentioned the earlier involvement of Permiat, which is very fascinating, and how the early younger, I mean, some of them are here, Cik Idris, Prof. Yaakob, and all that. In their younger days, they were engaging with multiple strands of thinking and orientations. And you look at some of their writings when they were young, in Insaf, is it, or Sedah? I forgot. Insaf, right? I've seen your writing also in there. And they were engaging with diverse thinkers and orientations that are contesting with each other all over the Muslim world. But somehow, along the way, from the 1980s to 1990s, something has changed, that we are obsessed with a single narrative, a single identity, and we forgot how to engage with the multiplicity of identities in our community. And when you have that lack of engagements, then you find that some groups felt that they don't have a part to play in forging that overall narrative of what it means to be Malay Muslim here in Singapore. And it creates a lot of tensions now. So I think we have to go back to the very basis of how we accept the multiple and contesting identities within our community, and also how do we think about ways of engagement that will actually be looking towards a new future that engages with the reality that we have on the ground. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Maybe we get another question, the gentleman. Yeah. Forgot your name. I think it's Idham, is it? Idham, yes.
Idham.
Yeah, Idham, the big fat one.
Orang besar kita.
Assalamualaikum, I'm Idham. Adding on to my former colleague's point, Imran, I would like to also know, last time, this place brings me back memories. We actually organized, I think some years ago, discussing about the identity, the status quo of the Malays in Singapore back then, dengan arwah Cikgu Naim Daipi, Mr. Alim Kadir. We had a symposium here attended by almost 200 people. Until now, I still do not know what is the identity of Malay Singapore Malays. Until today, I'm still confused. Anyway, but adding on to my friend's point is that I'd like to know, how can we know the identity? And I was actually moved by a thesis written by Dr. Professor Vincent Tan from SMU with regards to the social mobility of the Singapore Malays itself. As like what Cik Zainul mentioned just now, not many Chinese know how many Malays. I think that is the problem. Knowing, I come from ACS, so I relate to RI students' problem, but
Wrong
we
school,
do it
right?
better. We give free places to Malays who wants to come to ACSI, paid by the alumni. The point is that a lot of my friends are saying they cannot identify capable Malays to fill in posts. We always hear Malays saying, tak ada peluang, tak ada peluang. But most of my friends who are headhunters are saying, there are Malays who are able to do this, there are Malays who are qualified to do this, can you please introduce me? Based on that, I'm right now setting up a foundation called Cheetah Foundation to actually improve social engagement with the other races for the Malays so that they can understand why and our way of life, our way of doing things. Like tomorrow is Ramadan, so a lot of the Chinese bosses, I also work with PMATs, you see. So a lot of the bosses are telling me a lot of Malays want to go back early during Ramadan. They are weak. 5:30 must go home, cook for the family. Cannot overtime because malam ada tarawih. Then we have to pray 5 times a day. And these are the questions which actually surfaced during, I think, a study done by an organization here. So how does our identity, heritage, we need to tell them the real story of, the real picture of who we are. You know, Ramadan doesn't mean that saya lembik. Serious. You know, prayer doesn't take half an hour. Going to Friday prayer doesn't take 2 hours. You know, allowing workers to go. I think a lot of efforts need to be put in to actually clarify, highlight, and demystify what Malay Muslims' identity is. Thank you.
I think there are serious issues there about the understanding or lack of understanding. Equally important, I think there are also problems of not wanting to understand. If there are enough people who want to understand and reach out, I think we can do something. But there are some people who feel, no need to talk about it. We just carry on with our own lives, and then we are Singaporean. There's no issue about race, about language, or religion. So whether there is that need especially from the non-Malays wanting to understand Malays and Muslims, because even the issue of being Malay and being Muslim, we see it as integrated as one, but they see it as a problem. What kind of Muslims you're going to be? So I think here again, how do we bring about the better understanding is something which I think we need to. I think your example of Cheetah, your new organization, started off with the more professionals. This is a new development, whereas we have been concentrating on Mendaki, education, Muis, religious development. But even Muis, I think initially was basically mosque development, rather than what we're talking about in terms of identity. All this came much later. And maybe it's easier for a more professional organization, which I think the non-Muslim can relate easier to, in terms of bringing about that better understanding than them having to go to Muis. Because when you talk about Muis, religious council, religious organization, they already had that concern, rather than working in the secular context. So I think a question of approach is one, whether it's Mendaki has done his job and done the job well. But going forward, Mendaki, AMP, or they feel that need at one time. But now, when we talk about all these issues, these challenges, which organization is actually handling it? I don't think there is any. And then if you want to have organization handling these kind of developments, who do we work with? When you talk about the ministry curriculum, is it the ministry, the thinkers, the policy makers? When you talk about the Chinese community, is it the Chinese chamber? Or is it younger? Is there a Chinese version of AMP? There isn't, I'm sure. So where do we reach out to? So if you just depend on students, leaving to them the interaction, it won't happen. They're just going to have Rojak, Mirabos together maybe. But talking about Rojak, Mirabos, I'm glad Zainul Rahman is here. So it's going to develop something also along those lines about the importance of food. I think there's also a book recently out on food. Food is a very important, maybe important way of us getting and reaching out first through food and then bringing about the understanding. But I think these are the issues I think we need to handle. And when we talk about heritage, for example, even this Malay Heritage Center, how many non-Muslims and non-Malays do we get actively coming to this visit? And what do we show them? I think the exhibition which you have, I think is a very attractive idea, very good ideas there to show. But are we attracting the Chinese, enough Chinese and enough non-Malays? I think that's a challenge for us, right? So we need to identify and then try and get them to work with us so that we can have better interaction. But mind you, it's not just about them understanding us. It's also about us understanding them. That also can be a challenge. So I think Imran's question, I think yeah, again, it revolves around those areas too, Better understanding what the challenges are, who are the agents of change, who are the agents that can do the reach out for us, and whether it's the intellectual university level, Cendekiawan level, or is it the PA, People Association, the grassroots organizations. Because we see the grassroots organization, they basically, activities which we do get participation. But understanding these kind of ideas, this kind of concern, this kind of issues, I think hardly happen. So it's a different level altogether. So the challenges are there. I'm glad we have this topic. But I'm glad also that this topic is not just about the song and dance, but it's also about the mindset, and how we can actually work with all parties concerned, non-Muslims, non-Malays, the region, policymakers, And before that, ourselves, asking the questions which we are asking now. What is it that we want to put across? How much of the heritage is actually about our concerns about losing the traditional ideas of heritage, which I think may be of less importance to the non-Malays, non-Muslims. But when it comes to your mindset, mind share about what kind of Muslim you're going to be, what kind of Malays you're going to be, or what kind of Malay Muslim you're going to be in the context of the Singapore we have today, in the context of relationship with our neighbors, ASEAN, and the world. I think that is something we need to address, and we'll have to leave it to the younger people to work on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zainul. I think it's a very fascinating talk, very fascinating engagement. I just wanted to highlight the earlier point you mentioned about, I mean, most of the questions you talk about multiplicity, diversity, but I think an earlier point you mentioned in your speech about how the founding leaders actually mediate this. I think diversity is a given in a society. There are different ethnic groups, right? And how certain communities have to make sacrifice in order for the greater good. I think those were mentioned earlier in your speech, Of course, certain communities were upset about certain things, but at the end of the day, they were willing to make that sacrifice for the greater good. But at times when we talk about diversity and multiplicity, we tend to focus more on inter-ethnic. It's always about the different ethnic communities. Sometimes we forget within the community itself there are diversities. There are cross-ethnic problems, cross-ethnic issues. And here I'm talking about class issues, for instance. Within the Muslim community, there is a diversity of orientations, for instance, and we've not really openly discussed this. Maybe we should invite you again for siri ketiga Cendekiawan Series yang pertama, and Mr. Zainul, we can discuss these issues. But it's really a fascinating talk. I think it's a good engagement. I think you have brought us the significance of history and always reflecting about the community and the problems. And I think this should go on. And I think this is a conversation starter. The Cendekiawan Series is a conversation starter. As I mentioned in my speech, is to mungkin mengusik minda masyarakat, to get them thinking. I think that's important. I mean, if we keep on talking about success stories without talking about problems, I don't think we are seriously engaging with the real issues of the day. So I think that's all the time we have. We should conclude because I think it's also very close to Ramadan. I think we want to make Selamat berpuasa to everyone. Thank you for our community leaders who are here today. Minister of State, Dr. Faisal Ibrahim, thank you for making time. High Commissioner to Malaysia, Dato' Asfar, thank you for joining us. Prof. Yaakob Ibrahim, and all of you here who joined us today. Selamat berpuasa, thank you very much. So before we go, maybe I would like to take this opportunity to present a token of appreciation to our Cendekiawan Series lecturer. More books for him to read and more talks, inshallah, in future. Thank you. Let's put our hands together to thank the Zainul Abidin.
This collection is quite special because it's about the center itself. And as some of you know, we are going for a revamp towards the end of the year. So terima kasih Cik Zainul atas perkongsian tadi. Sudah seperti yang dikatakan, definitely more than grandfather stories. Okay. Banyak kata-kata mutiara yang boleh kita menjadikan pemangkin dan juga inspirasi untuk kita semua. So saya persilakan Cik Zainul dan Dr. Norshahril untuk kembali ke tempat duduk. Okay. Right. Actually, I wanted to respond something, if I may. Chairman, can I just make a quick response? For what Dr. Cik Zainul mentioned about this interaction between how we can also generate interaction with others. And I wanted to present another perspective, which is a flip side. Apart from being a general manager of foundation, I'm also a volunteer docent, meaning I do guide, tell the stories about the community at the museum and also outside here at Kampung Gelam. So we want to tell the stories about the community, the heritage, what it all means. Now the interesting thing is we have about almost 70 guides very active volunteers who volunteer at the Malay Heritage Centre, and I tell you, less than 10 are Malay speaking. Okay? The remaining are people from Japan, from Korea, from Europe, from America. They are very interested to know about us. But why is it we are not coming forward to share our own stories? So this is another perspective to your whole issue about, how do we, what can we do to really promote our identity, the multiplicity, the diversity, the richness that we have when we ourselves sometimes are not the ones coming forward. So when we do have visitors, sometimes from Malaysia, from Brunei, and the guide that's bringing them through to the exhibitions, for example, is someone from Europe. But interestingly, they sometimes bring very interesting anecdotes. So one of the docents, for example, pointed out this particular design of a porcelain, which came from UK, and apparently it's only made in this particular factory in UK, specifically for the Asian market, because of the whole China trade, because of the whole porcelain trade that goes through from Singapore. So I think there's always room for us to learn from each other, but it's also about, at the end of the day, both parties have to play a part. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So with that, I just wanted to share that. Okay. So, So, terima kasih Cik Zainul dan Dr. Norshahril, dan untuk membantu kami terus mempertingkatkan program-program yang kami lakukan, sila imbas QR code ni dan mungkin bantu kami untuk memberikan maklum balas. Okay. Right. So the next one. Seperti yang dikatakan awal tadi, kami masih memerlukan sokongan anda untuk menjayakan pelbagai program kami. Secara ringkas, MHF merancang untuk menganjurkan 18 sesi ceramah, webinar dan seminar secara total sepanjang tahun. Ini termasuk siri webinar yang akan berlangsung dalam talian dan sesi seminar khusus untuk golongan belia. Ini adalah antara usaha kami untuk merancangkan budaya mengkaji dan pendokumentasian untuk memperkasa warisan intelektual dan gedung ilmu masyarakat kita. Kami juga ada menerbitkan beberapa buku. Jika ada yang berminat, boleh mendapatkannya di luar dewan nanti. Selain penerbitan buku, MHF juga ada menganjurkan acara kemuncak Hari Warisan untuk meraihkan dan memperingati sumbangan golongan budayaan kita menjelang akhir tahun ini. Jadi, so untuk mengetahui tentang kegiatan kami, boleh mengikuti kami dalam kesemua social media channel ini. The next one? The next one? Yes. That's the most important question. That's the most important one. Okay. So, kami ada code QR. Ada tak? Okay, tak apa. Right, yes, finally. Okay, so anda boleh juga mengimbas kod QR ini untuk memberikan sumbangan anda. Setiap sumbangan $50 ke atas akan diberikan pelepasan cukai 2.5%. Okay, kita sudah pun sampai di penghujung majlis. Kami ada menyediakan sikit buah tangan untuk semua. Bawa baliklah masa besok dah berpuasa kan. Jadi jangan lupa untuk mengambilnya apabila keluar dari dewan nanti. Jadi sebelum mengundur diri, kami sekali lagi mengucapkan ribuan terima kasih atas kehadiran anda pada hari ini. Selamat menjalani ibadah puasa sehingga bertemu lagi di lain kesempatan. Saya Julina mengundur diri.